This video is going to be about the Benelli Supernova and a common problem that a lot of people have with it, how to fix it, and also how to disassemble your trigger group assembly if you're wondering how to do that. I am going to try to do this video all in one take and not try to edit it, so if I screw up, use the wrong terminology, stumble over words, whatever, I'm just going to ignore it and move on. First of all, make sure the gun's unloaded. Obviously, open up the action, inspect the chamber, make sure the chamber's clear, look down at the follower, make sure you can see a red follower in there. Gun's clear. The problem that people experience is that when you load rounds, this ramp, the carrier, will stick in the upwards position. And when you go to pump the gun, it won't return to the fully downward position, which results in a round being dropped onto the ground through the loading port rather than being fed from the top of the carrier into the chamber. So I'm going to try to demonstrate that, and I will have to force the carrier back up into the upwards position since this gun has been fixed. What would normally happen is that you'd pump the gun and the magazine would release a shell, and there it is on the bottom. Now, that's no good. Now you got a dead man's chamber. Fix is actually quite easy. All you have to do is pull out the trigger group assembly and tear it apart and remove a bit of material from a small part called the bolt stop tooth. Normally you would have a cap on the magazine tube that has a little nub on it that you can use to push out these two pins. I don't have that. I've got an aftermarket magazine tube extension, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a punch, and pushing from the ejection port side, I'm going to just push on those pins a little bit, and as you can see when I flip it over, they do have heads on the pins. They can only be inserted one way. Just want to pull those the rest of the way out. The rear pin is shorter. That's because the gun tapers. With those out and with the action fully forward, comes out just like that. So I'm going to set the gun to the side. First thing you're going to want to do here is relieve some of the tension that's on this group by dropping the hammer. I say drop the hammer, you don't actually want to drop it. Put your thumb on it, remove the safety, and let the hammer gently forward. That's going to remove a lot of tension on all these parts. Next thing to do is to remove the little C-clip on this rear hollow pin. It's actually pretty easy to lose. What you want to do is stick your thumb on the flat side of the pin and use a small flathead screwdriver or something similar to pry up underneath that pin, and it'll pop right off. Just be real careful not to lose it, because you don't want to be crawling around your carpet trying to find that little pin. Push this hollow pin out from the side. The pin that holds the trigger in place is this little chrome pin here. It doesn't have a head to it, doesn't matter which side you push from. I'm just going to use a small punch, push that through, stick my thumb over the trigger and the disconnector to make sure they don't go flying out. Pull that pin off, set it to the side, and that should come right out of there. If this falls apart when you pull it out, it's no big deal. That'll come right off. To reinstall the disconnector on the trigger, you just got to push it onto the pin and then compress this spring and put it over the notch on the end of the disconnector. Set that aside. Next thing you're going to want to do is remove the C-clip from the second hollow pin. Same procedure as before. Find the flat spot, stick your thumb over it, and use a flathead screwdriver to dig under and pry that out. Should come out real easy. At this point, one of your carrier latches is going to come off. Just set that aside. Now what you want to do is very carefully push this pin out while kind of holding your hand over all the parts that are inside so they don't just come flying out of there. Just work it out, and you'll feel everything sort of expand in your hand. Just release it. Nothing flies apart. Good deal. You set that aside, the other carrier latch. First thing to take out after that would be the hammer. It's just sitting in there. Remember which way it goes in. Next thing you want to do is remove the carrier and the bolt stop tooth. Best way to do this is just rotate it up like so. You'll notice there's a pin on the other side that's got a head to it. If you rotate the trigger group onto this side. It won't fall out as you pull it out, so you can work that out of there. Then you want to pinch that pin and just pull it out. As I mentioned, that pin has a head in it. To get it out of there, just rotate it over, falls right out. And set your carrier to the side. You don't need to mess with that. This is the important part that we're going to work on. I'll get to that later. This might come flying out depending on how gently you take the trigger group apart. This thing is called on Benelli's sheet the bolt stop cap, and there's a spring inside of there, and that's called the carrier spring. I don't know why that's not called the bolt stop spring. Who knows? Set that to the side. Something else that might come flying out is the hammer spring cap and the hammer spring. As you can see, just a little bit of pressure on your breech bolt latch, which is the part you hit with your finger to open up the action, will cause that to snap back, and this could come shooting out. So I'll remove that and take the spring out as well, and we'll have that as part of the assembly procedure. So that's pretty much disassembled. The only thing I haven't removed is the breech bolt latch. There's no reason to, and also the sear, the spring, and the safety. Those can all be removed if you so choose. I found it quite difficult to get this tiny little spring that gives sort of a spring tension to your breech bolt latch. Couldn't get that back in very easily, so I'm not going to take that apart again. What I did to fix the problem is I removed a tiny amount of material, about 0.02 of an inch, from the notch closest to the hole in the bolt stop tooth. When I measured from these 2 points right here, the factory measurement, I got 0.580 inches. After removing material, I got 0.562 inches. So just a little under 0.02 of an inch of material gone. You want to take careful note of the shape and the profile of that notch before you move any material. This edge here isn't a sharp edge, it's rounded, and the inside here is not flat, it has a slight curve to it. I don't know how much it would affect the operation if this was sharp and that was flat, but just to be on the safe side, I try to maintain the same profile that was there before I started removing material. And obviously you can get carried away, and I'd assume that would interfere with the action of the weapon, so check with a set of calipers as you're removing material and make sure that you aren't removing too much. It could go a lot quicker than you think it would. Assembly is really the opposite of disassembly, with one small caveat. I found it easier to use the rear pin here from the wrong side in the front to get the parts lined up, and then to push the front pin, push the rear pin out with the front pin. So I'm going to do that. First thing, hammer spring and hammer spring cap. Move your breech bolt latch out of the way, stick that back in there. Then find your bolt stop cap and your carrier spring and put that back in its hole. Now you want to reassemble your carrier and your bolt stop tooth. Grab that here. Just got to line the hole up like so, and real carefully stick that pin in there. Now if you pinch that pin, it's not going to fall out as you assemble it, so stick that back in the trigger group and maneuver it down into its area. Next thing you're going to want to do is use, like I said, use the rear pin, the rear hollow pin, to align the parts. The first part you're going to align is the carrier. You're going to have to push against that carrier spring to line that up, and make sure that your bolt stop tooth doesn't snap past the bolt stop cap. So stick that in there. Not all the way. You want to leave a space to insert your hammer. Use the hammer to push down on the hammer spring and hammer spring cap, and then push on your hollow pin, and that'll snap in place. Next thing you've got to align is your breech bolt latch. To do that, just look through the other side, and maneuver that into position, and then start pushing. I just snap that in place. You might have to work with your carrier a little bit to get the hole on the opposite side to move through, so I'm just gonna, there we go, went right through. Now you're gonna grab your carrier latch, the one that has an angle to it, as you can see there. There's a tooth that goes in a notch up here. Make sure you stick that in the notch or you'll have problems. And move that over that pin. When you have this assembled, there should be a little bit of spring tension there. That's the way it's supposed to be. Now use that forward hollow pin to push out the rear hollow pin. And make sure you don't set the hammer back before you do this or you're going to have a hard time. There we go. That's assembled. I found this nearly impossible to do just sticking that pin in from this side. And I sort of had to improvise to figure out a way to get this back together and avoid sending a box full of small parts back to Benelli for reassembly. Grab your other carrier latch and install it on the side there. It's got a tooth as well that goes in a notch, but it goes on the outside, not the inside. Put it over that pin, find one of your C-clips, and put the flat side on one of the notches. And holding your thumb over the flat side, just push down on the curved side to push it around that pin. You should hear it snap into place. Next thing you want to do is reinstall the trigger in the disconnector. Just drop the trigger in, and it's actually easier if you cock the hammer at this point to install this. The one thing you do want to look for is this notch can get behind the sear. You want it to be on top of the sear, so be wary of that as you are maneuvering everything into place. First pin you want to put in is going to be this lower chromed pin here, the small one. Try to find, get everything lined up, and you should be able to see right through once everything's aligned. Whoops, I had it there for a second. There we go. Engage the safety and make sure that everything is moving. If it's not, if you've got the safety on and that doesn't move, your disconnectors become hung up on the sear and you got to take it apart and figure out how to get back together again. Sometimes it's just luck. Grab your hollow pin, push it in from the ejection port side. Grab your C-clip, same as on the other one. Find the flat side, put it on one of the notches, put your thumb on the flat side to keep the thing from springing off into who knows where, snap it on. This is back together now, so we're going to grab the rest of the shotgun. There's a little nub on the front here, that's got to go in first. Just hold this in place with your hand. Remember to put the pins in from the opposite side of the ejection port, and remember there's a small pin and a long pin. Small pin goes in the rear. Use a punch or something to make sure these are fully seated. There we go. And now you want to check for function since you have had this disassembled, obviously. Just open the action, watch the carrier, make sure it's doing its job. Looks like it is. So I'll stick a dummy round in there. You can see that's locked to the top, but now, even with the gun upside down, if I open up the action, that pops right down to the bottom. Turn it around this way and look. There's your round where it should be, and you've got a chambered round instead of a dead man's chamber. Hope this has been informative for you. Like I said, if I used any incorrect terminology or anything like that, I do apologize. I'm trying to follow Benelli's terminology as much as possible. I'm not really a Benelli guy or even a shotgun guy, so kind of having to adapt my knowledge of handguns and rifles to this shotgun. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helped you out.